a cemetery for Medellin. This is the oldest cemetery in the city. The central courtyard where you are now was the first to be built. Its circular shape, known as a rotunda, overlooked by a chapel, is of European influence. Here you can see the monumentality of the mausoleums of people and families, protagonists of Antiochia's history, from their business, political, and cultural work. On Thursday, September 22, 1842, the doctor, engineer, and merchant Pedro Uribe Restrepo, in partnership with 50 representatives of the Antioquia elite, formalized by means of a public document the foundation of the first private cemetery in Medellin. It was initially named San Vicente de Paul. Mr. Uribe Restrepo was a character with strong civic values. He led the founding of institutions in the city such as pharmacies, theaters, and hospitals. The initial design of the cemetery was prepared by Pedro Uribe Restrepo himself. In the planning there was a noticeable interest on the part of the partners for the healthiness of the place. The order, the symmetry, and the planting of trees made the space a harmonic enclosure. At the beginning of the 20th century, the practice of importing marble from Italy increased among the elite. The central courtyard of the cemetery was characterized by artistic works made by renowned craftsmen and artists both national and foreign. By the 1930s, San Pedro had a European cemetery style based on French boulevards, where ornamentation and landscaping became central elements of the funerary space. In 1964, an intervention project was carried out that contemplated the change of the facade and removed the iron railings that served as a fence, to be replaced by ample walls. Upper floors and new spaces for administrative uses were built. This reform generated a break in its architectural appearance, losing its European garden image to give way to take maximum advantage and usufruct of the available areas. The cemetery of San Pedro towards the 1970s ceased to be the cemetery of the rich. Other social groups came to bury their relatives and populated the peripheral galleries, as if it were another neighborhood. With the presence of new social groups that made this space their own, in the midst of one of the most convulsive and painful chapters of violence and drugs trafficking in Medellin and throughout the country, other practices, rituals, and forms of memory emerged with which to honor and communicate with the mourners. The once cemetery of the rich then became known as the place that housed the history of all in the Medellin fin de siècle. In 1996, a study was carried out to assess and recover the cemetery, which was in crisis after decades of stigmatization and abandonment due to the violence faced in the city. This situation motivated the management of the cemetery to formulate a plan for the conservation and revitalization of the site, based on the recognition and understanding of its historical, aesthetic, and ritual components. This work resulted in 1998 that the Cemetery of San Pedro became recognized as a site museum and in 1999 declared a National Cultural Heritage Property by the Ministry of Culture of Colombia. Continue your visit and move to the next station, Chapel, that you will find in front of the left garden.